Hello and welcome to the Jackass, the Swansea City podcast. I am Guto Llewellyn, and with me tonight, as usual, we have Matt Barocco and Stephen Carroll. How are you boys?
Good, thanks.
We've also got a special guest. This is something that we don't do very often on the Jackass, but we feel that it is necessary, possibly even essential for tonight's special episode. So please welcome Andy Godden, who is the former chair of the Swansea City Supporters Trust. And we have got him on the show tonight specifically to respond to the latest revelations that have come out from the Supporters Trust and the decisions which have been made surrounding the previously ongoing legal action against former shareholders. It all related, of course, to the 2016 takeover of the club and the way the trust was bypassed in that. Now, there has been a meeting tonight. We're recording this on Thursday evening, immediately after a special meeting was held to try and enlighten members of the Supporters Trust as to the reasons behind this week's revelations. But before we get into that, Andy, if you could just give us a little update on what exactly was revealed earlier this week.
Yep. No, thanks. So I think that the members found out, I believe it was 3:15 on Tuesday afternoon, which is about just less than 4 hours before the trust AGM, that the trust had signed a deal with the former shareholders and the current majority owners to basically end the legal dispute that had been going on since, basically on and off since 2016, really. So as part of that deal, there was an email sent out by the trust with some detail, and I'm going to say what was said in it, rather than, because obviously there's been some questions raised after it. But basically, the aim was to have a degree of compensation, which is around 500,000 guaranteed, and potentially 1.5 million if we get back to the Premier League and stay there for 3 years. So I think it's 500,000 every year, plus a guarantee that 5% of the shareholding will be protected in perpetuity. So the trust would always have a director on the board, and I think that the remaining shareholding. So at the moment, the trust has 21% shareholding. The remaining 16% could be diluted or not, but it still retains that under various rights. So that's basically it. So for cessation of the legal case, basically a cash return of 500,000 and a level of protection of the shareholding.
And of course, this came as quite a shock to everybody because the trust members, Steve, had previously voted in favour of taking legal action against those former shareholders. And as far as everybody believed and understood, the situation remained so until this announcement earlier on in the week. I mean, it's fair to say, Steve, it's not been very well received by the unanimous, those who unanimously backed the litigation in the first place.
Well, I mean, obviously, I think that about 81%, I could be wrong on that, voted for the legal action. So as far as we were concerned, there was a mandate for legal action, and the only way to then stop with legal action is if there is another vote that suggests that the membership don't want that anymore. So for the trust board to then accept a deal without the members knowing and without the members having a chance to have a say on it, it's not really good enough, is it? I mean, what was the point of the vote in the first place? That's the way you have to look at it. If it's not going to be abided by. Now, this was revealed in 2017 that there was an option that the trust board could take the decision, but on that occasion it was decided that the previous offer from the Americans had to be go to the membership, which was absolutely the right thing to do, and that should have happened this time. And I think regardless of any deal, that is what the main thing is that leaves a sour taste in the mouth. I mean, various aspects of the deal everyone will have an opinion on, but it should have gone to a members vote, and I think there's a lot of people who are very, very unhappy about this, and it's understandably so, isn't it?
And Andy, the thing that gets me in all of this is that there is more than a hint of hypocrisy in all of this, because so much of this initial, well, everything that's gone on between the trust and the club as former shareholders and the current shareholders over the last few years is down to the fact that the initial takeover was done behind the trust's back, that it was sneaked through the back door and deliberately avoided involving the trust. I think it's quite clear to everybody that that was the case. That is the reason that this legal action was taken. And it therefore leaves quite a bitter taste in the mouth that the trust itself then has gone behind the backs of members in already going ahead and agreeing this deal with those shareholders without taking that vote, as Steve said, back to the members.
Yeah, the parallels between 2016 and probably 2022 have been noted by several people, haven't they? You know, things being done under the behind the backs of people. So this is one of the questions I asked tonight. You know, was there truly not some way of getting this back to the members? You know, if there really was no other way, if there, you know, the confidentiality aspects of it just simply didn't allow it, then I would have liked to have heard that. I think so. This is going to be a bit technical, but or a bit detailed. But so there's two groups of parties to this at the moment. There's the ones who are funding or who were funding the trust legal case, and of course there are the ones we were taking to court. So there was a lot of talk in the meeting tonight about the people who are funding the legal case wouldn't like a lot of details being made public. But and that's fine. I can understand that. But I think that's missing the point somewhat. I don't think you need to take that to the members. I think what you certainly need to take to the members is the detail of any offer you're being made, that is being made to you. And if that cannot be made public, why not? Is it because you don't want to make it public, or is it because the other side, i.e. the majority owners, Jake Silverstein, or the selling shareholders, do not want it to be public? And if they don't, why not? For it just to be a case of them not wanting you to do it, I'm sorry, but that's not good enough. They weren't particularly keen on us making it public in 2017, but we are a members' organisation. The board is there at the will of the members. You know, it's they can be legally authorised to make decisions on behalf of the trust, but when it's something this seismic, I think as Steve mentioned, you know, there have been two times in 2017 and 2019 where we went back to the members on this topic. You can't just ignore that now. And I didn't hear a good enough reason why that didn't happen.
Do you know what, Andy? What struck me was that was the decision that they took, and as we've already discussed, they have the power to do so. But given the initial decision had gone back to the members to say, right, I know the first time they came out, there was a push from the trust to go down the settlement route and not take it to court, and then it came back and they went off the table, and all sorts of nonsense happened back then. Yeah, and then they came back and said, right, actually now we're looking at this will have to go down the legal route. And I think throughout this, the anger was always directed at the former shareholders and at the current owners of the club as well, in the sense of this duplicitous action that happened has dissolved the trust, excuse the pun, between the club and the owners and his fans, sorry. So that was always the avenue. And through the dark times and through the going back to, you know, 2001, you know, way back then, it was always we will look after each other, we will look after this club. So even if the advice they were given from those around them were, you can't go to your members because the backers won't like it, or the former shareholders won't like it, and it may disturb anything. The first and foremost, in the trust board's mind, surely should have been, this isn't up for debate. This would go back to the membership. If that is upsetting to someone, then that is some conversation we need to have. But what we will not do is follow that trodden path of the previous shareholders did just a few years ago, which has been just the very thing that we've built this on is we do not like that sort of action being taken behind the backs of the members. And as you just discussed, I cannot believe they decided to follow that same route.
Yeah, and there was a very important point that was made by Clive Ince today. Clive Ince was the lead from the legal side, from Godden Derrick, and he said, the funders wouldn't have liked it. Now, it didn't say it was a showstopper. Didn't say it couldn't have happened. It was unhappiness about it. And as you say, this should have been a number one priority. This shouldn't have been optional. And best will in the world, it's pretty clear it wasn't pushed hard enough.
And I mean, Andy, it's that I think is the main issue that people have felt aggrieved with in all of this. That kind of feeling of that they've gone against the will members and haven't followed that the democratic process and the precedents that have been set in place. But I mean, the fact that they didn't take it back the members suggests to me anyway that they knew it wouldn't have been accepted, because the secondary reaction from so many people seems to be it's not a great deal. And I'll be honest, looking at it, I'm struggling to find an argument in favour of this being a great deal. I've yet to hear anybody enthusiastically stick up for this deal. And were there any kind of arguments tonight to say, do you know what, this is the deal that we need. This is the best deal that we could have possibly got out of this?
I've yet to hear anyone be neutral, actually, let alone positive for it. I mean, there are positives about the deal. I mean, 500,000 in the bank is great, although I think, as was pointed out in an earlier meeting, we've actually spent 400,000 on the legal case, so it's only actually 100,000. But the trust will now have a level of funds, which is great. That's not to be sniffed at. If in 2001 we'd said we'd have a trust with £700,000-800,000 in the bank or whatever it is, I don't know the figure, then I think that would have been seen as a positive. What they can do with that going forward, given the state of football at the moment, is an interesting thought.
Yeah, I was going to ask that actually, because £100,000. I mean, when the trust was first set up 20 years ago, that would have been a heck of a lot of money.
Yes.
But I mean, these days that's surely a drop in the ocean. I mean, there were people talking about this being the chance to build up a kitty that could give us the chance to take over the club in the event of it going through a kind of Derby-style collapse. I personally felt that even that was optimistic. Even if we'd won the case, then that still maybe wouldn't have given us quite enough money for that. But I mean, 100 grand in the grand scheme of things for the trust, what can it really do with that money that's going to make any kind of substantial difference?
So that's 100 grand profits from where we are from the overall thing. So it's 500,000 on top of the existing funds. So I don't know the current levels, but I would imagine there was probably something like 800,000 in the account at the moment. So, but what can it do with that? Given where football is now, I don't know, to be honest with you. Probably not an awful lot. It's really difficult to know. I can see what the trust has tried to do with this deal, in terms of getting a level of compensation, and also doing something that ensures the trust is involved in the run of the club going forward and protected in that. I think as we talked earlier about the questions Lisa Clement answered, I'm not sure it entirely gets those protections that the trust was hoping to get. But I guess we'll find out once. I believe the trust has promised they will be publishing the answers to Lisa Clement's questions, which I think is really going to be critical to determining exactly what protections we do have to ensure that there's no sort of shenanigans over the next few weeks, months, years that really does remove the shareholding the trust already has.
I guess one of the things that come out from this as well is one of the opinions that came out of this after we discussed the mandate they had of the members to go through the courts is what's changed really, and what has come to the point that we discussed in this podcast many times, the fact that we didn't expect it to ever reach court, because we expected the closer it got, the closer it got, the itchier the feet would get from the previous shareholders, and the more willingness there would be to sit down and put down an offer which would substantially better the one that was rejected some years ago under Phil Sumler, which he now says makes this one his offer looks brilliant back then, which is startling because it was meant to be quite shocking back then. So looking at what's changed, I mean, from your point of view, they appear to have been scared off the idea of court action, the idea that they may not have won in court, which is a bit of a ridiculous statement in itself, because nothing is a sure thing. But the idea was that they had a solid case, and then they put that to the members and said, look, we think we've got a solid case here. What do you want us to do? And as Steve said, around 80% said yes. Yes, we fund this. This is for us, and we think we want to take this to court. Rightio, and that's what we'll do. What changed in your mind to make them scared off that? Well, what the members wanted.
I'm glad you brought up the 2019 consultation, because a few of the things that were in the trust statement of the last couple of days were saying, oh well, legal action is unpredictable, it's complex, we could lose, we don't know this, we don't know that. We said all that in 2019. That's not news. That's not a reason to change your mind. There were some interesting things said in that regard this evening. There were some concerns about the level of funding. So I believe it was confirmed today they had funding for a certain level in terms of the initial litigation funding and the insurance, but there was some concern that the trust wouldn't have the funds if it went to appeal, or if that budget had been exceeded, etc. I mean, there are always theoreticals in that sort of scenario, but you budget for a reason, and if your budget wasn't sufficient, then why did you have that budget in the first place? That's what we had the likes of Godden and Derek for. They prepared the budget. So if that budget was wrong, why was it wrong? And if it was wrong, then you look at getting more funding. If you need more funding down the road, then you can address that then. There might be chances to settle before then, and the trust would have had the option to settle all the way through this until it got to court. So there are always reasons why not to do something. A lot of those reasons were previously shared. I must admit I didn't hear good enough answers today why that couldn't be proceeded. But I think there's a more sort of general point around this, that if the trust board at this time didn't feel it could push the button on this, then it should have told that to the members, because the members voted for litigation to proceed with litigation. And if the board didn't think they could carry it through, they should have stepped aside for somebody who could, or at least had the option for that, or gone to the members and said, yeah, okay, we don't think this is the right decision, even though you've asked for it for this reason. And so where do we go from here? This all goes back to consulting with your members. Now, the trust board may have the legal authorization for things, but after we've had 2 consultations, does it have the moral authority for it?
Steve, you were on the meeting tonight. What did you feel was the mood from members who were taking part? I mean, were there any kind of burning questions that you felt received a satisfactory answer? Were any moods kind of cool down after it, or did it just kind of make things worse tonight?
If anything, it probably did make it worse. I mean, there was a lot of anger in there, but it is justified, really, isn't it? I mean, you can't go against your members. I mean, 2 things are probably going to happen now, and there could be a vote of no confidence, or the membership will dwindle considerably because people have lost it with them. So, there was a lot of anger. I don't think the answers were really satisfactory. I think some of the questions that came in were probably tough to answer, which is understandable, but we need answers to these things. I mean, it hasn't been justified. That's the issue. If you're going to go against your members, you really have to be able to justify it, and I don't think that has happened, really. So that's the tricky thing. And obviously, we've got the likes of Andy and I know Phil Sumler that have previously been on the board, and they have said, obviously, as well, that, they think this was the wrong route to go down. And when that happens, again, the members are going to side with the people that have previously been on the board and have basically steered this to a certain point. So I think it's going to be difficult now going forward for the trust, because I think for a lot of people, they've literally lost trust in the organisation, really. So I think that's a big problem. And what is going to happen now, like I said, is one of those two things. I can see a lot of those people that are on the board being booted off if other people stand. And that's the key to it, really. How many people are going to stand? Because if they don't, then I suppose it'll continue, but it'll continue with low members, which isn't really worth a lot.
How much of this? Sorry, Guto. I was just about to say to Andy now. How much of this is personally annoying to you, Andy? That the hours and hours and days and weeks and months that yourself, Lisa, Phil, and others all contributed towards sorting this out for a long, long time and get us to a point where we can go to court with this. And after this now, a new board gets put in place, and it looks like they just turned over and had their bellies tickled.
Yeah, it hasn't been the best use of my time in the last few years, has it? So it's that's a really it's a really difficult one to answer. Obviously we're recording this immediately after the forum, so there's I'm not sure I've quite calmed down just yet, but I'll probably have a couple of drinks after this, and maybe I'll feel better. But yeah, you know what, you agree or disagree with people, and that's fine. But you know, you expect things to be done in a certain way, and I think for this to be done behind people's backs, I think that's the thing that galls me above everything else. You know, people can be for and against the legal action. I don't have a problem with that. They can have disagreements for how we do things, but you know, we remember a trust is a members' organisation, and it's clear lots of trust of its members. I've not heard one person. I saw one person on the trust fit members group saying they were in favour of it. Elsewhere, it's just been pure anger, really. I don't think it was helped in the meeting tonight. There were a few board members smirking when Nigel Davis was very passionately putting his points across. That really put a lot of people's backs up, I think. I mean, on a personal note, I was pretty angered at the end where, you know, Dave Dalton was talking about how he was, you know, stepped into the role in cold in September, and you know, wasn't aware of certain things, took him time to get up to speed. Well, you know, he was vice chair last year. There was continuity in that board. Both Lisa Clement and I were part of the subgroup until October when we stood down. So there was attempt to dodge certain things, which I thought was a bit unseemly, to be honest with you, and I was disappointed on that on a personal level. But I think, yeah, no, it is what it is in that regard. But yeah.
Matt, you're not a member of the trust currently.
No.
As somebody on the outside, I mean, even if you're not a member of the trust, you have to understand that the trust has played a massive role in the modern history of this football club. And I think even a lot of people who aren't members of the trust still feel an affinity towards it and feel that it is something worth protecting. I mean, where does this latest development leave it? Because there's no doubt in my eyes, the trust's influence has dwindled significantly. And I get the feeling that its kind of relevance to the wider fan base seems to have dwindled as well over the last few years. And I get the impression that a lot of fans have been asking for quite some time, kind of, what's the point of the trust? And is the trust really the best representation for fans? As somebody who is not currently a member, what do you think about that? I'll ask the same question to Andy and Steve in a bit, but yeah, to get your opinion first.
Yeah, well, I was a member for many years, and it was the way in which things had gone a bit sour with the trust that made me think I won't be renewing. But that said, it was always still something that you thought, you know what, they always have the best interests of the club at heart, even though the initial sale left a few question marks on how little and how much the trust actually knew about the sale. It didn't quite sit right with me that they could have been completely blind to it throughout that whole sale to the Americans. But even back then, when you look at the way the club was, as soon as we were sold, or certainly in the months leading after that, where we could find out the details of what had happened. I mean, I remember we did a special on it on this podcast around the time, and it felt then that once it became clear of the shareholders agreement being ripped up or not disclosed and stuff to the Americans, and it was all very shady. The first thing we were discussing was, look, no, you know what? If they can be taken to court and made to pay at the rate they were buying shares at, which is around about £1 million per percent, then the trust stand to gain £21 million here, which, as we talked about many times previously, was exactly the sort of rainy day fund that could mean they could buy the club if we went down into League Two or League One or whatever, and the Americans wanted out and wanted to sell just to get out of the business. Then it would have been something that would have been fantastic to have. So it was an either-or situation, that you had to either maintain your relevance or get out and go high. And so the fact that they've done what they've done now, what good is this 5% that they've managed to retain? I mean, really, they're still going to be ignored in the boardroom. They're still going to be told they can't tell the members X, Y, and Z because it would breach confidentiality. They can put their points across, but I don't feel like they're going to have any say. They've not got a voice in there. We've seen that in the way things have transpired over the past few years. So I feel like they picked the worst of both worlds. They should have either gone out in a blaze of glory and gone to court and sold that and gone to sell the whole lot, or fought as much as they could to retain a voice in the boardroom. And I feel like what they've done is they've sold, but they've sold ridiculously cheap and left themselves with nothing. There's going to be questions now. I've seen plenty on Twitter the last few days and speaking to people. It does feel like people are now questioning what the purpose of the trust is. What have they got left to stand for? Because if they have lost the trust of its members, then those memberships, as Steve mentioned, are going to dwindle. From what I gather, there have been a few people mentioning votes of no confidence in the meeting tonight, and whether that comes to pass, we'll see. But as Steve said, it needs people to stand up. It needs fresh faces. It needs someone. But what can they do? I mean, from what we gather, this is a done deal. There's nothing more to be had. And the absolute best case scenario now, Guto, is that we go up to the Premier League. We stay there for a few years. So we bank the potential £2 million, and then we get sold by the Americans after a few years for a similar sort of fee they bought it for. So they can, and with the tag rights that we seem to have negotiated into it, we can force the sale of the 5%, get out completely, and make another 5 million off it. But still, it's a quarter or a third of what they would have stood to get if they took it to court and won. So it does leave a bitter taste, even for someone who isn't a current member. And it makes you think, well, all that hard work, which we've all read lots about, that everyone has put into it, all feels like it was for nothing. And a lot of people have been let down. To hear from Andy that they were smirking on the meeting tonight is just shameful. And it's not the last that's going to come of this. There'll be some ripple effect and repercussions over the days and weeks to come. And a lot of people are very upset, and rightly so.
Steve, you've been a very long-term member, and you keep track of everything that goes on in the trust while not being on the board itself. I mean, how damaging do you think this has been to the trust's image within the club, its reputation, and its relationship with fans? Because there are many other long-standing members who are now saying that they're considering quitting, or they've actually said they will quit. Is that something that you're considering?
I'd have to say yes at this stage. I mean, what is the future for the trust? I mean, essentially they've let down the members, haven't they, by making this decision and not going to a consultation. I mean, since there's a vote about anything in the future, arguably people will think, what's the point in voting? Because even if we vote for something, the trust board have the right to not go ahead with it. So it's going to be a big problem now going forward. Well, what else can you say about it? Time will tell what will eventually happen with it. But, I think a certain amount of them people, if they're coming up for re-election in the summer, probably better be wary that they will not be there by the time the next season starts. But, look, I mean, from the club's point of view, they've had a result, haven't they? Certainly the former shareholders have had a result where their reputations remain intact. Nothing will go to court with certain revelations that may have come out. and it's cost them hardly anything in comparison to what they were paid out by the Americans when they sold the club. So they're the winners, aren't they? I suppose from the first team's point of view and stuff like that, is it a good thing it's been settled? Maybe, but at the end of the day, for the long-term future of the club, probably not, because I mean, when it was mentioned in the meeting about, you know, the aim of the trust to make sure there's a club in Swansea, well, the two things that were suggested was one about the rainy day fund that obviously may have come in from this legal action, and obviously that would have been there to bring in the money potentially to buy the club or to buy a certain percentage if the club was in trouble. And the other one was obviously if you've got a certain percentage in the club, then you can prevent certain things happening, and now we don't have either. So that is a problem, and yeah, you know, this is the lowest moment for the trust, I would say, and the entire time it's of its existence.
Andy, where does this leave the trust? Because it's got a membership now which seems to be largely unenthused by the direction it's taken, and many members feeling betrayed, let's face it, by the events this week. It's in a position where its shares could very possibly get diluted. You know, they could be down to 5%. You know, in the long run, they've still got a member on the board, but how much of an impact are they going to have with the trust clearly in such a weak position right now? I mean, I'm going to ask the question: what is the point of the trust right now?
No, easy question. So I think Steve mentioned reputations there. I don't think the reputations of the sellers and the other shareholders has quite been helped by all this. I think it's still in the gutter for a lot of people. I think we have to remember the selling shareholders and the majority owners were part of this deal as well. If the trust has been screwed by this, they screwed them. Yeah, just going back to 2016 briefly, we did try and sell the shares then, to be honest with you. There was discussions about 7.5, for example, that fell by the wayside. There was a deal in 2017 that fell by the wayside. The reason the trust was left in the position it is now, we have to remember this. It was because of selling shareholders. It is because of majority owners. That's why we are where we are now. In terms of trust and where it is now and what it can do going forward, we have to separate two things in my eyes. We have to separate things on the ground, dealing with the club's management team, and we have to talk about governance, you know, and things that matter in terms of the existence of the club. Now, in terms of the stuff on the ground, I don't think that's going to change an awful lot, to be honest with you. One of the positives I had last year was that I'd like to think I had a pretty good working relationship on the ground. So, you know, Julian Winter, Trevor Birch before him, Gareth Davis, finance, Andrew Davis, the stadium manager, Becca Edmund-Simmons. You know, we had regular meetings with them. Things like the season ticket refunds, for example, I bring that because I think that's a really good example of us working well together. You know, obviously during the pandemic, that was a touchy subject, and we came up with some options, which I think were, you know, very well received, and we had considerable input into that. There's various other things going on as well. You know, there's former players association, things like that. You know, and day-to-day stuff. You know, the trust does have, you know, a lot of involvement in there, and I hope that won't change. I don't see any good reason why that should change. Where it is really going to change, I think, is sort of at the board level, the governance level. One of the things I thought the legal action did do was that it kind of helped. It did sort of keep people honest a little bit. You know, during the last couple of years, you know, Stu McDonald was the sport director. He attended board meetings. We had monthly management accounts. We had access to ask the technical questions. I do wonder how much of that will exist going forward. We're really going to find out, I think. I'm really interested to find. We still have so many questions about what this deal actually means in terms of the rights, privileges, and the protections the trust has. That I think we're only going to find out over time, and that's really going to dictate, you know, what the trust can do in that space.
Go on, sorry, mate.
Sorry, I was just going to say one more thing. The trust has value. It still has value, not the value it did, which it was set up as a governance organisation. It wasn't set up as a fan club. Unfortunately, now it's a fan club. with a token shareholding and a degree of funds. It's lost a lot of what it had. I hope we can get it back, but it still has value. It's difficult for those of us who joined it because we were interested in securing the future of the club, whether we can still be part of that. But I do think it still has value, but it's got a hell of a battle with the membership and the fan base to make itself relevant and to convince the fan base is relevant. Because I think Steve made a really good point there. If you can't trust the trust, can it continue as it is?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the big issue now, isn't it? Forget about driving new membership. This is going to be trying to retain the membership it has as well, given the revelations of this week. There's been many questions, Andy, about where's this future money coming from if we get promoted? Is it and that's not been answered. It's all we come under this cloud of NDAs and stuff like that. This nonsense which we've had previously, which really gripes with me, because if you have to go under an NDA, I feel like then it already feels like they're going to pull something. They're going to pull a fast one. It happened before to the trust, and it feels again like, so we can only speculate at this stage. Now, from what I can see, we talk about let's look at Jake Silverstein's investment, or his loan, if you like, into the club, and he's put money there and can convert that into shares. Now, he's been quite vocal, quite a front runner on the way the club's been run over the past year or so. It's very much more so than Jason Levian. So to see this being brought into the same sort of conversation as this settlement, this idea that they could convert, we could end up down at 5% trust holding, does lead the question. Silverstein was clearly one of the main front runners in settling this and in being trying to encourage the trust board to settle this. And I wonder if this was a deal breaker to him to get this done, for him to perhaps increase his financial interests and purchase even more shares in the club, and maybe in the not too distant future become the majority shareholder himself.
Yeah. What is Jake Silverstein? It's a bit of a curious egg, isn't it? As far as we're aware, and I should stress it in that way, we don't think he's a shareholder. He's certainly not a shareholder in Swans 2002, which is the company. The majority shareholding in the club is held by Swans City LLC, which is a company incorporated in Delaware, which was those 27 shareholders, or the fund or whatever it was that people talked about a few years ago. Now, we have no visibility on who owns anything as part of that. So it's possible Jake has a stake in that, but we don't know. For full disclosure, I spoke with Jake Silverstein a few times last year when I was chair, just to see whether there was anything, any path to resolving this. And it didn't really go anywhere. But he did talk about how he's in this for the long term. He's talking about spending time over here. I was told this week, I don't know how true this is, he's looking to buy a house here. So it's the way he's talking. He's in this for the long haul. Now, that you always hear rumours about what's happening with the club. It's barely a year goes by without somebody mentioning, is Martin Morgan to be coming back in or whatever. But you do wonder whether there's something going on and that this is part of. It wouldn't surprise me. But they're gonna have a hell of a job convincing the fan base it's a good thing, aren't they?
Goodness me. Can you imagine a Martin Morgan buy-in again? I don't think this club fan base is ready for that sort of drama. It feels like this should be on BBC at 7:30, not at a football club. But
he's still a shareholder. Everyone forgets.
Yeah,
this.
He's
got a 5% share.
So him and Jenkins, they're both still involved, aren't they?
They are. Well, yeah. Martin Morgan's a director and an active one. Hugh Jenkins is still a director, but I don't think he's actually been to a board meeting since he was sacked as chair. So
of course,
he could turn up if he wanted to, couldn't he?
Oh, he could absolutely. Yeah.
I believe Trevor Birch has shares in the club as well, doesn't he?
You know what? We don't know.
Oh, right, okay. I believe I read at the time, but you'll know more than me, that was some part of his financial package, but maybe...
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It was mentioned. as it stands in Company's House, he doesn't.
Yeah.
I actually looked at this morning to see who the discuss when there's a change of shareholder, it needs to be disclosed at Company's House, and that hasn't happened yet. So as it stands, he doesn't. But no, I remember that actually, and you're right. There was rumored to be part of his compensation, but all I can say is at the moment that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah.
It would be strange if the man leading the EFL had shared
Is that
in.
a conflict of interest?
It's a slight conflict of interest. Isn't it?
There
I've actually got a question.
There could be another scandal brewing here, guys. There could be another one.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Guto, because obviously you've been asking a lot of them, but not had an opportunity to speak as such. But what I found particularly odd was that the club announced it through its official Twitter feed. And what's it got to do with the club? It's Russell Martin being asked about it in the press conference.
Don't get me started on that.
What's going on? It's got fuck all to do with Russell Martin. And do you know what? If he had his ear to the wall at all, he'd know that this is a particularly precious story going on in Swansea at the moment, and he should have just blanked that straight off and not wanted to address it, because the audacity for him to be asked and then to answer it just didn't sit right with me. The fact that it came off the official club feed, the club was never involved. It didn't sit right with me, Guto.
I don't know who asked Russell Martin the question, but it's fine for them to ask. I mean, if it's a journalist asking it, I take it was a journalist and not somebody from the media team at the club. But if it was a journalist asking them, then that's their prerogative. They're looking for a story, obviously. But I haven't heard Russell Martin's reply. I've been working all day, but it's got nothing to do with him. This is the point that's been stressed. This was nothing really to do with the club. It was taking individual shareholders to court. That's what this was all about. And in that respect, the official club channels had no business really in releasing that statement. It's a bit like, it reminded me a bit of when kind of the Bury chairman was releasing statements through like the official club's website on matters which were directly related to his kind of comments in the media, etc. And you're thinking, like, hang on, the club isn't your puppet. You don't open the mouth and then the words come out. It's that was strange. I also found it strange that it was a joint statement. I don't know, that didn't really sit well with me, and that was coming out before, again, any details came out from the trust. There are a couple of things about the way it was announced that I don't think were really the right way of doing it, again, which is a theme in our discussions tonight, that has to be said. It wasn't really on, but I know, Andy, what did you feel about that?
I mean, I think I tweeted Russell Martin said it, and you think he'd have enough on his plate, really. Things haven't been going particularly well, have they? But there was a line in his it was one of the sentences he said was, well, for us now it's over and everyone can now work together. Well, I don't think this is going to achieve that, I'm afraid. There is, I mean, I think, as we've seen today, there is so much unhappiness amongst the membership, which is, a microcosm of the fan base overall. This solution has caused more problems than it's solved.
Do you really think? Has. Because that is one of the things that could have possibly been a silver lining in this, is that it has been hanging over the club and the relationship between the trust and the club's hierarchy. It's obviously going away now. It's being settled. The threat of going to court is no longer there. I mean, the one thing that people were saying was that this is a chance to kind of move on and put this behind us, but you don't seem to see it that way.
I don't, to be honest with you, and I've always thought the trust could be the best firewall for the club possible. If the club can show, and the majority owners can show, they're working with the trust and everything's great, then that's how it was in the 2000s on the rise. We all felt we were part of it. Who genuinely feels they're part of it at the moment? I must admit, I don't. I've never felt more alienated from the club as I do at the moment. I really do. And I doubt I'm the only one. In fact, I know I've had several comments from people telling me the same thing. it's going to be difficult going forward, I think. But for a lot of people won't care. Of course they won't. They just care about what's happening on the pitch. But a lot of people will, and a lot of the people that were there when it was very small numbers are really hurting this as well. So yeah, I do worry, I must admit.
There's always a percentage, isn't there, the fans who obviously they've got enough going on in their own personal lives, and they turn up on a Saturday for a bit of escapism. And if the club play well on a Saturday, Steve, you know this as well from the SCSA movement back in the day.
Yeah, I was going to come in on that, to be honest, where I remember there was a bit of pressure being built, and then I think we beat Liverpool and we beat Arsenal, and next thing you know, everyone's trying to say, "Oh, come on, you can't do this now. We've got a chance of staying up." But
I hate that.
About that so much. I mean, it's literally this short-termism just doesn't work. And in the end, we went down, and then people are criticising you should have done something. But basically, I think, as Andy will probably know, if you put yourself up for anything like this, you will never get credit if it goes well, if it goes badly, or you will get it in the neck.
Yeah, you're not wrong, mate. But the problem is we're not beating Liverpool or Arsenal anytime soon, are we? And it's really difficult to see. The championship at the moment is an absolute basket case as well, isn't it? So many clubs, are losing money in the championship, and I do worry we are becoming one of those types of clubs as well. I have my concerns, which goes back to the governance of the trust, it was good in the last few years. We've had visibility on the accounts, and at times it was scary reading them, and we were lucky in the sense that we had some big money sales, because otherwise we could have been in real trouble now. But in the last year, there's been money coming into the club. Last year, there's during winter a few times in the press this year has talked about needing cash to be injected this year. So it does rather tell a story that we're living beyond our means even now, when it doesn't seem like we are spending a lot of money. It doesn't seem like we're really pushing the boat out. Just to keep the level we're at, we are spending beyond our means, and we've almost gone bust twice. And if one season spending beyond your means is one thing, doing it for 5 seasons is a completely different thing. You see that with Derby, you see that with Reading, you see that with other clubs. I think that's a real concern for me.
And Andy, the thing with spending beyond, you said they're spending beyond for one season is one thing. Well, actually, that's how it starts. I mean, that's how it started with us. We basically qualified for Europe. We invested a huge amount in the squad to get it up to boost its size. Wages went up, etc. Well, the thing is, as soon as you start rising wages for some players, then everybody else has to come in line, and it's a vicious circle then, because that wheel never stops turning, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's what we found when we were in the Premier League, is once you start pushing those boundaries and start lifting that barrier that little bit higher and higher and higher all the time, it's very difficult to reverse that trend. It's pretty much impossible until you have some kind of crash all of a sudden. I think that's what a lot of fans don't really understand. There's a point being made, recently, I think, that a lot of clubs now, we're seeing protests. Derby, of course, we know what's been going on there. We've seen protests at Birmingham and Reading. These are all clubs where the protests have come once the money's not being spent anymore. There was nobody protesting when Reading were spending way beyond their means and paying huge wages. Everybody was thinking, oh, fantastic, ambition, we're going to the Premier League. It's only when that kind of the ramifications hit home then that's when the protests come, and that's why I guess having a trust is so important, to keep an eye on things like that, because quite frankly, the ordinary fan, we're seeing this petition now that's in the news. It's not got anything to do with what we've been discussing tonight. It's because there's a so-called lack of ambition, and the owners aren't pumping in investment and it's signing players left, right, and centre. That's what so many fans these days. And I don't think this is something new. I think generally it's been there forever, but that's the main priority. And there is always that kind of pressure to just spend without thought for the long-term consequences. And that's why actually we do need a strong trust, which does hold the club to account. And that's why it is worrying that it does seem to be losing its influence at that level.
Yeah, you've mentioned two words I absolutely hate when it comes to football talk. is ambition and investment. So
me too. Absolutely hate it.
Ambition is basically what does that mean? Is basically just chucking money at it, without any thought of the consequences of that. Oh, look at the ambition we got for spending 7 million. Well, at the end of the day, our turnover this season is 15 million, give or take, I would imagine. Based on previous precedent. We're not in receipt of parachute payments anymore. When people talk about investment, that is invariably money loaned to the club. We've seen that with Derby, we've seen it with countless other clubs. You borrow money, there's a time when you got that gets called in. What happens then? For me, the only way it works really in the long term is if a club is run in a self-sustainable manner. It's the only way really. It's where we were until we got promoted. It's where we were in the Premier League as well for a long time, because obviously there's a lot of money there. And the worst thing that ever happened to us, I suppose, in terms of where we are now, were the decisions that were made in the back end of the Premier League era. Because we tied ourselves to we made some awful decisions that last season. I don't think any of the signings worked today in hindsight. We spent a lot of money as well. But that the contract.
Are you saying that Sam Klukas didn't turn out to be a fantastic signing?
Sam Klukas gets a bad rap, mind.
I would say it's not his fault.
Deservedly.
It's not his fault.
I've only ever spoken to Steve Kaplan once. This is probably an exclusive for you guys, but I was at Charlton away. I'd been on a bus for 5 hours at the Red Lion lot, so probably had a few drinks at this point. But I was asking, okay, so explain to me the Sam Klukas signing, because it didn't make sense to me that we signed for 16 million or whatever it was, a player that got released by Lincoln 4 seasons before, and had one good season with Hull, and he talked a bit about metrics and things, but it's a sign that didn't make any sense to me at the time. And
we give away Stephen Kingsley as well as part of that deal. He was quite promising at the time as well, wasn't he?
I liked him as well. I mean, it didn't quite work for him either at all, did it?
No.
But no, I mean, in a way, I felt quite sorry for Klukas. He took a lot of stick from A, the nature of the deal, and B, the fact he was replacing Mr. Sigurdsson, who we're not allowed to talk about anymore. And it's
we'll cut that out. It's fine.
Yeah, please do. But it's. Yeah, no, I did feel a bit sorry for him, but then the way he's acted at certain times, partly justifiably, I think
he's reacted rather than acted. Andrews, and he's kind of taken a lot of abuse. He epitomised our collapse, really, didn't he? And he took a lot of abuse for a few seasons, and in the end, he run the full length of the pitch of the Britannia to celebrate in front of us.
Yeah.
And wherever we are.
And you know what? In many ways, I applaud that level of shithousery.
I'd love it to have been ours, Had to by all moment.
We've moved on to discuss the final Premier League season, which is always a terrible way to end a podcast. So we'll do whatever we can to not do that. So, Steve, we'll go to you first. What do you want to see happen next from the Trust point of view? What needs to happen in your view as a member?
Well, it just feels like it's too late, really, to do the things that we wanted. This had to go to a vote, as I keep saying. It didn't. So, arguably, do the people now who are in charge need to be put up for a vote in terms of no confidence, I suppose. That's the way of looking at it, isn't it? I mean, because what else can you really say about it? People are really annoyed about it, and it's such a big decision to be taken out of our hands that arguably now we should be voting on it. But, as I've said before, if people don't stand, it's sort of irrelevant. So we need people to stand, and I'm being hypocritical because I'm not willing to stand, because if I'm honest, there's two reasons. I'm a fanzine editor. Immediately that means I can't do a fanzine anymore because it'd be a conflict of interest. And number two, I'm not sure I want the hassle, and I can't blame anybody else for saying that as well, because let's be honest, as I've already said, if it goes well, you won't get the credit. If it goes wrong, you'll get slaughtered.
Andy, final word from you. What would your heart is very close to the Trust. You've put hours and hours of work into it over the years. What would you like to see happen next to kind of repair the damage that's been done by the past week?
Oh God. All things being equal, I think the Trust still has a stake. It still has a level of funds. The fans need an organisation that it can rally behind. So I hope the trust survives. Obviously tonight there's a personal element of this to me where I'd be letting my personal views cloud my judgment, maybe, especially so close after the meeting. But I think it's going to be very difficult in the short term for this current board. But I think we do have to remember that trust boards are very transient. We had half the board was changed this summer. Who knows what happened next summer or before. So separate the organisation from the board in many ways. So it's going to be a bumpy few months, I'm afraid.
I think we need to get Andy, Lisa, and Phil Sumbler together to try and get some grassroots of another organisation going and see if we can get something from there. And can't start begging.
Phil tried that last time.
Oh goodness, I don't know. It's going to be. It's going to be. Do you know what, Guto? I think that they need to now come out and ask the members what they want. If that is a confidence vote, then so be it. But now the moment's gone for the actual deal. But in terms of where they go from here, they need to ask the members what they want to happen, because to build that trust again, the members need to feel that their voices are being heard again.
Precisely. Well, that brings an end to the podcast where we've discussed a turbulent week in the history of the Swansea City Supporters Trust. In many people's eyes, not a great week in any way for an organisation which has been key to the history of this great club. We will be back to normal service before long, but we did feel that this was an important subject which we needed to cover in depth. Thanks as usual to Matt and Steve, and thank you very much for Andy for joining us tonight and giving us some of his insight into a subject he knows so well. We hope you've enjoyed it in some way, and we hope you'll tune in again before long when we'll start we're discussing football matters once again. But until then, thank you very much for listening.